Okay. You understand we're on the lesson called Vayishlach, right?
Yes.
Shlach, to go, or in this particular case, it's about he was sent or he went out, whatever way you want to pronounce it or think of it. That's what we're talking about, is he went out. Now, in the last Parsha, we talked about the fact that he was leaving Haran. So in that particular case, we're talking about going out or thereabouts, which was why it was titled Vayetze. So here he is now, having arrived somewhat back into the land. And so that's where we're at. So it's on, this is the 8th Parsha in the series, and it starts in chapter 32 and a verse number 4. That's where the whole thing begins.
Yeah.
Now, if for a summary of the whole thing, since I'm not going to cover it unless you have questions about it. We know that he's leaving there, that he has put a distance between himself and Laban. And in the process, he's now gone to Yarbach, which is the place where he is going to cross the water, and he's going to split his family into groups, and he is going to deal with Esau at that particular place. So there's going to be a whole partial of things that are going to actually happen. Then after that, we're going to find him going from there towards Shechem. And at Shechem, he builds himself a sukkot, a temporary village. And in this temporary village that he's got, in this temporary village that we're talking about, one of the things that you should understand is the fact that it's not in Shechem, but it's just outside. In other words, from his doorpost, he could see Shechem, where it was actually at. He would be closer to the place of Aval and Gevrim, the place where the tablets were, and they declared good and evil. That was going on there. So he camps there. He's there for a while, and Dinah, his daughter, becomes very familiar with the girls of Shechem and ends up going over there. And that will be one of the things I want to talk about, is the rape that goes on there. And then from there, it goes back to the fact that, his last son, Benjamin, is born, and his wife, Rachel, will die on his way down to Hebron. So he's going back home to where his father was, and he'll be there long enough to help bury his father along with Esau at that particular point in time. So that's pretty much the chronicle of this first phase of his life. So hopefully it's going well at that point in time. Now, to begin, I want to talk about the fact that Jacob and Esau are meeting. They're identical twins, although we don't see them as identical. We see the redness of Esau. We see the brains of Jacob, but Esau was equally as bright. In fact, Isaac looked at Esau and saw more potential in Esau than he did in Jacob. And by that, I mean the fact that if you look at the personalities of the two men, Jacob and Esau, Jacob's personality was not what you would call the outgoing, door knocking, whatever have you. He was the indoor person. He was the studier. Esau, on the other hand, was out and about. He was everywhere. He was physical. And because of all the physicality and everything that he was, Isaac thought that Esau would be the better person to carry on the lineage and the ideas, what's going on. Now, in the process of doing that, he needed wealth. And so if we go to the blessing that Jacob steals from Esau, you'll find in that blessing that he has taken from him what would have been all that he would have needed in order to become, if nothing else, successful. So that's the point behind that whole story. Now, in knowing that, we come to the conclusion that Jacob now has spent 20 years away, 14 of it for the two ladies, another 7 years accumulating wealth, not counting these 14 years that he spent with Shem and Ever at their school. So he's been away from home a long time. Remember, on the way out, Eliphaz had come because he was sent by his father to kill Jacob, and Jacob talked him into taking his wealth as opposed to taking his life. And so that's how we ended it. Now Jacob is returning to the land. He has plenty of cattle, plenty of sheep, plenty of all of the animals. He's quite wealthy. He has staff for all of the things that are going on, plus all of his family, all the tents. He would have been a mobile city moving through the desert and through the plains as he's going towards Esau. Now, if you look at the first lines of it, it says, then Jacob sent Mecharim. He sent angels on ahead of him to see Esau, his brother, and he went to the land of Seir, which is down southeast of the Dead Sea, down at the southeast corner of the Dead Sea. And he was there at a field, and he charged them, saying, the angels, this is Jacob, thus shall you say to my Lord. In other words, he now gives Jacob, Jacob is giving him credit. It's not his goal is to actually put himself in a position where he and Esau can work together towards what Isaac saw as the mission that Abraham had started. So he's going with the intention of trying to create goodwill between the two men after what we now have is 34 years. But Esau still has the anger. He still hasn't gotten over it. If you listen to the story in that verse, it says that, thus shall you say to him, my Lord, to Esau, so said your servant Jacob, I have sojourned, again, gone through, he's a stranger, with Laban, and have lingered until now. I have acquired oxen and donkeys, flocks, servants, maidservants, and I am sending to tell my Lord to find favor in your eyes. So the angels returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau. Moreover, he is heading towards you. Notice there's no conversation. The angels were sent on a specific mission, to which they certainly fulfilled that mission. Esau does not respond to their message. All that they come back to tell him is that Esau is on his way and he's bringing 400 men with him. So he understands that Esau is going to be formulating. Now, remember, Jacob has already sent his family off in different directions. He's also sent a offering to Esau, so that Esau, and again, he divides the offering into parts. So therefore he doesn't receive all of it at the same time, but he is attempting to wear him down with what's going on. Now, in the process of wearing him down, it does not appear as though it's working, because he continues to come and he continues to bring his men as he comes with him to that particular battle site. Now, as we're going through this, the night before Esau arrives, Jacob is standing at the river Yarbak. Now, Yarbak is spelled with 3 letters, a Yud, a Bet, and a Kaf. Jacob's name, taking away the vowels, are Yud, Bet, Kaf. So there's a purpose in this particular place. Now, remember, he came back here because he had left some pottery there. So God put him back to where he needed to be to pick up the last of his mementos. And that's where it was dark. And that's where he decided to spend the night. Just like when he was leaving and he ended up at Bethel. It was dark, he spent the night. Now, in this particular case, he's not only spending the night there, but he's going to be finding himself in the midst of a struggle. His brother is going to be seeking revenge, and as he goes through the night, he finds himself at war with an angel. We've identified the angel as being Esau's angel, his personal archangel, or his personal guide, or whatever you want to call him. But I want to talk for a second about what's going on. So I want you to look at verse, 32:25, if you will. 32:25. Okay. Now I want you to go to the Hebrew side. Everybody loves to go to the Hebrew side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines up from the bottom, which is Kaf Hey 25. Can you find it?
Mhm.
I want you to go to the middle of that line and you'll find a Vav, a Yud, an Aleph, a Bet, and a Kuf. You find it? Okay. Now that word that is there is Vayakev. Vayakev, Vayahavek, Vayahavek, Vayahavek. It's easy for me to speak Hebrew. If you think about it, again, 3 basic letters, Aleph, Bet, and Kaf, Kuf. So he's wrestling here at this particular point. Now, he's said to be wrestling with a man at this particular point. So a man wrestled with him, and he wrestled until the break of dawn at that point in time. Now, the angel that came to wrestle with him had a purpose. He had a mission, because no angel goes anywhere without having a mission. Somebody sent him. And in this particular case, God was the one who sent the archangel to him. And so all of the energy and courage it would have taken to defeat this angel, because it was an angel. Remember, he is not the biggest. I mean, he is strong. He moved a rock in order to open a well, but he's not the biggest of men, nor is he big enough to throw around an archangel at this particular point. Remember, he's going to be facing in the morning what would appear to be even a more formidable character who is also more physical than he was. So the purpose is for him to overcome this character first, then to overcome Esau. That's how he begins to see the picture. So they begin to fight. Now, in this particular case, I want to again come to those letters, Aleph, Bet, Kuf, Avach. And it's, again, the idea is wrestling. Now, there's 3 ways that you're going to be able to take that one word and look at it and help to explain what was going on that night. Now, the first way is the word, again, also means dust. So when they wrestled, they were struggling in the dust. Now, the idea of struggling in the dust is a metaphor. In other words, where does the dust go? It's a dust up, or what we would call it's ascending towards heaven. So what's going on is the angel has stirred up the dust that is going to reach the throne of God. That's the dust up that's going to happen. That's the wrestling match that's going to happen. Now, the wrestling match is between the angel and Jacob. Jacob representing the good inclination, the angel representing evil in the eyes of Esau's angel. Now, there's a second word that we need to understand, because Rashi says that the letter Aleph can be exchanged with the letter Het. Het. That creates the word which we call Havak, or embrace. If you watch a Greco-Roman wrestling match, it's not like what we do here in the United States. It is men embracing one another to hug, in other words, and throw each other to the ground. So it's almost like a sumo match, only sumo wrestling is even more bizarre. But the concept is that these men are embraced, they're holding on to one another. And the whole idea is that there's this interchange that's going on between the 2 men as they're struggling with one another. And the idea of embracing here is about the idea of the purpose. And the purpose is to throw the other one down, to stir the dust, to do something different. Now, when the Shet, the Baal Shem Tov, read this section, he said that what he was looking at was the reality in 3 dimensions. And what he said was we were created with good and evil in order to perfect the world and our soul in the divine. And so this whole struggle is about rectifying and committing ourselves in the divine, going in the right direction. So first off, let's go back to the idea of rectifying. Now, the word itself gives us a idea of a world, because remember, he talks about the world, the souls, and then he finishes off with divinity. So in the term of rectifying in this world, that's where we're at in this world. You really need to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist in order to process what's being said. And that's when I went to Rabbi Ginsburg for some understanding, because Ginsburg, remember, he has a book out that deals with the 3 ways to understand each letter in the alphabet. And so he begins by talking about the fact that what we're doing is we're processing reality, and we're trying to process it on a higher level, a level above where we're at. So the word for world is olam. Olam. It's Aleph, Lamed, Mem. But the Aleph, when it's punctuated differently, becomes the word Elem. And Elem means hidden. So there's the physical world that we can see, and then there's the hidden world we can't see. And so the war that was going on between these two brothers was in the Elem, in the hidden world where you have to choose to rectify. It's by kicking the dust up, I guess, towards God's throne. You've been involved in stories or situations yourself where you find yourself wrestling with something or someone or some event. And in this wrestling, there's this tussle. And the idea is that you are trying to cause yourself to lift up, to throw down, or to lift up completely to God the problem. We do that all the time. We go to God with our problems, or at least we should be going to God with our problems. So that's what was going on in one form of it. Now, the soul doesn't require rectification, only the body. The body is what requires the rectification. So the origin of Jacob and Esau's archangel is the secret for this embrace. The souls are uniting to be rectified. So when they're tussling with one another, there is a rectification going on between the two men. And we're going to see the same thing in the story. Well, I shouldn't say we're going to see the same thing. We're going to see a similar story in Dinah and Shechem when he turns to raping her. So we're going to see that the idea of this embrace, the idea that the souls themselves do not need rectification. What needs rectification is that which is around it. That's our bodies. And the transition or the transformation of our understanding between the two men. Because by the time Esau arrives to see Jacob, what do we know happened? The problem had already been resolved. In other words, the whole incident had already been embraced and had already been solved. So the third part of this is about divinity and about the fact that oftentimes what needs to happen is a torch needs to be applied to the situation, something to light it up, something to make it, to reveal God in this whole thing. Because how often do we spend time trying to figure out where's God in this? What's he got for us? What are we supposed to understand of this whole thing? So in this particular case, here we have Jacob, who is nonviolent, trying to find a way to deal with Esau in a nonviolent way. And in order to do that, he has to become violent with Esau's angel. You understand what I'm saying? Nonviolent Jacob spiritually becomes violent and embraces a wrestling match for the purpose of reconciling what's going on. Wrestling in order to create a revelation of God's light. What is it that Esau needs to understand? Because you remember, Esau at periods in time knew the right from wrong. He just couldn't hold the line. Remember, he could be with Jacob and with Rebekah and with Isaac, but as soon as he came across a temple That's when his soul wanted to be freed. He wanted to go towards that evil. But at the same point in time, when his father wanted venison, he immediately complied. He was willing to do good things, but at the same time, he had other intentions, things that were going on. Now, I want to take that event and I want to transpose it. I want you to go over to the event of Dinah's rape. It's down chapter 34. And hopefully I can make the tie understandable. If we look at 34:1, it begins by saying, now Dinah, the daughter of Leah. Now remember, how did Dinah come to be? Remember, Leah was pregnant with her 5th child, and Bilhah had produced, and Zilpah had produced, and they were running out of children that could possibly be for Rachel. In other words, she would have had no part at all in this. As it is, the final person that, while they're at Haran, is Joseph. And it's Benjamin that's born on the way. So going back to our story then, Dinah was inside of Leah, and Leah prayed that God would change it from a boy to a girl. And that's how this happened. Now remember, Dinah, is feminine. Din is judgment. Please judge fairly and honestly. Change your mind and make this into a girl. So the daughter of Leah, whom she had born to Jacob, went out to look over the daughters of the land. And Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, actually the Hivites are Canaanites. It's a sect of Canaan's family, was the prince of the region. He saw her, he took her, he lay with her, he violated her. He became deeply attached to Dinah. In other words, his soul attached to Dinah. You understand what I'm saying? His soul, literally, he became so infatuated with her that her soul and his became for him his. He attached himself to her, and in doing so, we have this new problem. Now, he loved the maiden and appealed to the maiden's emotions. So Shechem spoke to Dinah for a wife. By this time, he's already taken her into his home, and he's now, as many think, he's already had relationships with her. So Dinah is now in a situation where she's living outside the camp, and by the judgment of everybody around them, she belongs to him, or she is his. You understand what I'm saying? She is now his property, not in the sense of she is his property in the Hittite sense, but in the terms of relationships, the two have become one. They've created themselves into one. But Dinah did not want to be there. But notice verse 5. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah while his sons were with his cattle in the field. So Jacob kept silent until their arrival. And Hamor, Shechem's father, went out to Jacob to speak to him. Jacob's sons arrived from the field, and when they heard, the men were distressed and were fired deeply with the indignation. For he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with the daughter of Jacob. Such a thing may not be done. Jacob has said nothing. Now remember, he fought Esau to get back into the land and to try to bring Esau on board. He seemingly has no intentions of doing anything about what had happened to his daughter. He simply was going to allow it to happen. The people that couldn't accept that were the brothers. And of the brothers, 2 of them were definitely not going to accept it. And we know the outcome of that story. They were going to be involved all the way. Now, there's a second and third level to the story. So I'm going to start giving you some second level. The Ari, the Arizal, Rabbi Luria, he saw it as deep down that in Shechem's mean, evil soul was hidden a holy spark. Now, we talked about holy sparks before and how the fact is that we're to gather sparks. Well, this was a spark that was hidden inside of a prince that would have had no contact with Jacob. In fact, if it wasn't for Hamor going out, that was the only contact between the two men at all. And so he makes this particular point that that Shechem's spark needed to be released and elevated. Now, this spark could only be extracted by the contact between Dinah and Shechem. Literally, he had to rape her in order to take that real good spark and transfer it to her soul, because he was basically evil in all sense of the word. Now, the Ari saw that saw this hidden spark, but he went one step further. He said, had this never have happened, the character called Rabbi Hanayin ben Tradon would never have been born. Well, this rabbi happened to be one of the 10 rabbis who were martyred, along with Akiva, for the sin of the 10 drops of semen on Joseph's cloth when he was alone with Potiphar's wife. Okay, I want you to understand that. If you have questions, I'd rather you ask them now to try to make sure that we're all on the same page, because this is critical to understanding what Rabbi Aryeh, what Rabbi Schneerson, and what others have said. Because no way is rape considered a wonderful thing. No way did the woman volunteer to be raped. No way did Dinah go to that party with their girlfriends in order to be raped or to be taken into captivity. So that you have to understand that this was the one way in which God was going to transfer that holy spark from Shechem to Dinah. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Jan's looking at me with a puzzled eye. I'm glad I can see your eyes because it's helpful. Talk to me.
Okay. Where did the holy spark come from? You said it was Shechem had a holy spark?
Yes. Okay, let's go back to where sparks came from.
Okay.
If we go back to Genesis chapter 1, remember that in the building of the building of the man, he has 10 vessels. Those vessels are what we call the Sephrot. In the Sephrot was light. Now, when God first created the heavens and the earth, the light was so intense inside these first vessels, they called kalim, inside these first vessels, that they literally shattered the 7 emotional vessels. The 3 on the top were fine. The primordial ones, correct. You're going way back to the beginning. Thank you for helping. And so the understanding was that these sparks then that are now everywhere drifted into the earth. They're part of the earth. They were part of other beings. They were taken in from all places. And so as part of our mission, we're really gathering sparks. In other words, as we do good things for other people, those sparks are coming. But those are the easy ones. This was a very difficult one because it was deep inside an evil person.
Okay.
I would not expect for you to go to the meanest, ugliest tavern that you can find to go in there to find a good spark. That would be stupid. Although it wasn't really smart of Dinah to go to Shechem to be with the girlfriends at a idolatrous festival. That was where she was at when this whole thing started. So this positions that she found herself in led to her being captured, abducted, whatever word you want to use, and then to be violated by Shechem. Now, the word Shechem means shoulder. And you and I, when we get stressed out, it's in our shoulders. And that's because of the burdens that we seemingly place upon ourselves is in our shoulders. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what's going on. He had a burden. Now his burden turned out to be what he thought the answer was her, because of her beauty. That wasn't the answer. The answer was to change himself, to rectify himself, but he was in no way going to do that. And so the rectification for him came in the sense that his spark, that holiness, was taken out of him. And what Levi and Simeon destroyed was all of his evil, all of his impurity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I get it.
Okay, so that's what was going on at this particular time. Now, that is not to excuse the rape. I want to get past that. I want you to understand, I am sure that Dinah will be traumatized because of that event. In fact, I know she was, because Dinah would refuse to leave Shechem's bedroom until her brother promised to marry her. Simeon had to promise to. I'm sorry, go ahead, Lori. I kind of hear you mumbling, but I don't understand.
That was Tracy. She didn't know we were unmuted.
Well, that's about time. She didn't know something. But anyway, so Tracy, do you understand?
Well, I was telling Lori, I said she stayed in there because of shame, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
She's there because of her shame, refusing to leave. And the only way they could get her out of the room, Simeon volunteered to marry her. Now he could do that. He could marry his sisters. Now remember, we had the same situation when Jacob married Leah and Rachel. They lived outside the land. And Jacob, remember, was that purest righteous man who could not or should not have married the two, but he did. And when he brought them back into the land, one of them had to go, and that was Rachel, because Leah goes all the way to Machpelah. So anyway, this whole idea of what's going on, she comes to the point, she's in mental anguish, refusing to leave, and Simeon accepts her for who she was and agreed to marry her. Now, if you want, you can go to Genesis chapter 46, which is the chapter listing all of the people that left the land. And you'll find a very interesting thing happened here. If you go down to verse number 10, now this is a list of the people that came out of the land, okay, or came out of Israel and went down to Egypt. And there were 70 souls altogether. If you look at verse 10, you see Simeon's sons are listed there for you. And you go through that list and notice the last son on that list. And it's not in sequence as to birth order, but notice who he is. Shaul, son of the Canaanite woman. Okay. Now, we have never discussed this, so let me give you that that information now. 1, Shaul is the son created by Shechem and Dinah's relationship. Remember I said the Hivite is really a Canaanite? So Dinah, when she had intercourse with him, produced a Canaanite child. That's Shaul, Saul. Now you will see later on in verse number 14. Zebulun's sons are Sered, Elon, and Jahiel. Now these are the sons of whom she bore to Jacob at Pandam Aram. Notice the next statement. In addition to Dinah, his daughter. His daughter. Notice they don't say Jacob's daughter, they say his daughter. Question, who then was his. Jacob never claimed Dinah. Can you imagine your life spent in such a way that the sons, well, again, the sons were the most important. They carried on your lineage. And so the sons were there, but Leah's daughter, who she created with Jacob's help for the purpose of making sure she was a daughter and not a son. So everybody went out of their way, but Jacob, in his situation, he can't see it. He doesn't see it. And he really doesn't see it after she finds herself getting raped. First off, the question from the father, what did you do to make him want to rape you? Do you understand the question? Understand how it was said? So Leah is in essence a pariah, which is another reason why she didn't want to leave. But anyway, Simeon, in his righteousness, takes on Dinah and her debt and treats Saul, as though it was his own son. But it's defined as a Canaanite boy, not as a Jew. Okay? He's defined as a Canaanite boy. That's the important understanding here. So let's see, how do I want to put this? Now, Dinah obviously is going to produce this boy. And this boy is going to be very, very important to this whole thing. I want you to go to Genesis chapter 34, and I want you to go to verse number 21. Now, in verse 24, or chapter 34, verse 21, it says, these people are peaceably with us. Let them settle in the land and trade in it. For see, there is ample room in the land. Well, the actual words that were used was the land was broad-handed. In other words, it was wide, it was open. So, but if you took those first letters from the broad open area, you end up getting a acronym. The acronym is Rabbi Hanan ben Tredan. So Rabbi Aria said, this is why Dinah had to be given over to Shechem. Now remember, Dinah could have easily been Esau's wife, right? Think about this. When Esau came towards Jacob, Jacob split his family into units and he sent them on their way. With Dinah, because of what she looked like, they hid her in a box so that Esau never saw her. Remember, who was supposed to have been Esau's wife originally? Not the ones he ended up marrying, but who was supposed to be his wife? She was always weeping. Leah. Leah, the oldest, was supposed to marry Esau, the oldest. Rachel, the youngest, was supposed to marry Jacob, the youngest. He was denied Leah, but he should have been given as a substitute Dinah, but she's hidden. So the question then becomes, why? It's for this spark. All of this is working out just for this. We can't see the quilt, the patchwork in the quilt, because we're standing on the fuzzy side. We're not standing on the clean side of the carpet, looking at how the shag was put together. We don't get to see that. And so that's the problem with our story. Yes, it was terrible, but at the same point in time, it caused several things to happen. 2, when Dinah is regenerated or reincarnated, she will come back in 2 other women that we know of, that the Ari identified for us. The first one was Abigail the Carmelite. I don't know if you remember Abigail. Abigail was married to Nabal. Nabal was a wealthy crook. And remember, David was working for him, protecting and guarding his sheep. And this whole thing centers around animals. So in the course of time, Nabal will die, and she will marry David. Shechem was Dinah's first husband. She will remarry. Her second husband will be Simeon. Abigail is married to Nabal. Her second husband is David. Now she comes back a third time, but nobody really knows her name. There's several hints of who she is. It begins by saying that she was married to Tivianus Rufus, or the character who was the governor of Israel at the time of Akiva, the first century, the day when we have Christianity and all of the other things that are going on. Remember, the city is destroyed in 70 AD. Well, supposedly Pilate was there. After Pilate, there were two other governors. After the two governors, then came Tinius. From him, his wife became involved with understanding Judaism. When Tinius dies, she converts to Judaism and becomes the second wife of Rabbi Akiva. Does that make sense? Each time she comes back, she ends up in the hands of the most righteous man available. So yes, it was terrible what happened to her, but at the same point in time, God has used her in 3 different events in his own history. It is hard to say what he's used us for in the past, but I wanted you to at least hear that. Now, Dinah elevated the evil that was found in the men in her life, so we can't evaluate her actions to understand everything that's going on. But I want to tell you that the rabbis have come to the conclusion that there were 3 types of refining that were done in this, that this would relate to. We go through a refining process. Now, the first one is basically the idea of, well, it's the holy sparks that, we are all holy. We are also mixed with evil. We're both. But in this particular case, the first kind of refining is where we refine ourselves. Literally, we do away with that which is negative to continue to add positive or good to that whole situation. So it's our actions which lead us to the refinement. It's our actions which lead us to redemption. Now, the second way is, I like the analogy that Rabbi Ginsburg used. He said it's like going to a coffee shop to recite a blessing over a piece of bread and a cup of coffee. Some of our refinement is not so much what we eat, although eating is important, but how we go about the process of eating. He said, and Rabbi Arya agreed, many sparks that you and I accumulate and draw out are the sparks that we gather from the foods that we eat. In other words, the significance of praying before eating is to be stressed, not only because the food would be kosher or not kosher. That's indifferent. The idea is, how do you and I approach all things, including the most mundane thing of all things, and that's to eat. The third thing is the fact that actions lead to another purpose, and that's what Dinah is about. Her action of going led to another purpose altogether, totally different, totally unaway from what was going on. So, Dinah herself, it's interesting. Now, the only way that an action can achieve God's end is the idea of finding the spark itself and then refining it. So she fell into sin. She did not invite him to rape her, but the act was done. Now in the story of Dinah, it's a story of humanity inside that's gone upside down. I want you to turn to Psalm 66:5, which is what we're going to study this Sunday. And I want you to notice a verse, 66:5. I'll send you the link to the Psalm, but this is not in it. This is more, well, some of it's in it. Let's put it that way. 66:5. We did this last week, didn't we? So 66:5 goes, go and see the works of God. He is awesome indeed towards mankind. Again, history is a tapestry of events. We can only see the backside. Each fall may lead us to a Dinah kind of situation where we find ourselves confronted by a fallen spark. Hopefully we don't find ourselves in a position that Dinah found herself in, but we may never know the changes that we're going to cause to history because of meeting those sparks. Again, history is built one spark upon another. It's about gathering. That's what Adam's task was, to tend the garden. No, he was to rake and cultivate it for the purpose of finding those sparks. In the world to come, there will be no gardeners. I won't have to worry about pulling weeds from the flowers. I won't have to worry about bringing in extra soil or mulching or any of those other things. Mary, what you thinking?
Didn't Dina go there with good intentions? It seems to me I read somewhere that she was going to convert the women.
Well, that was one of the positive things that they thought, that was what she was there for. Nowhere does it really say why she was there. She's there at the time when they're celebrating an idol. So the chances are good. Yeah, she went there with good intentions. How many times we find ourselves with good intentions in the wrong place?
That
Because
was in the news in the last several weeks. We talked about that before the meeting.
Yeah, the idea of Rittenhouse went there to paint buildings and put things back together again and got caught in the middle of an armed conflict. The same thing held true here. Dina went there probably with a good purpose or to be with her friends or whatever have you. But the problem was where she was at and how she was supervised. She went out into the field. She was unsupervised is what they were saying. That's the concept of being open. So again, it's a story that, it's about
Starts
us.
off good, goes what we perceive as terribly wrong, but there are sparks to come out of it that are for good, for future.
For future. We live in a time when evil is all around us. I mean, I was listening today just as this whole thing was ending with Rittenhouse. As they were covering it, they took two quotes and put them on the air. One was from Governor Cuomo. Governor Cuomo said, "This is the greatest travesty that's ever occurred. That justice was never served in this whole event." The second person they put on was de Blasio, mayor of New York. Guess what he said? Pretty much the same thing as what Cuomo said. The understanding is we're living in a society where everything is upside down. Dina found herself in a world that's upside down, finding herself at a festival celebrating an idol whom she didn't know, didn't understand, didn't care about. She just was there with her friends. But what did it lead to? Well, God used it. He put a spin on it and he used it. but it wouldn't have been what you and I would have thought would have been a good idea at that point in time. We'd have probably hoped that if I could have stuck the sword in him, that the spark would have attached to the sword when I pulled it out. That would have probably been my best answer to the whole problem. But that's not what was going on. So obviously, after this is all over, Simeon, I guess, became a psychiatrist of sorts, because Simeon attempted to tranquilize the situation. He attempted to bring down the level of trauma. And the only way he could bring down the level of trauma in his understanding was to simply, again, speaking in a calm voice, deal with what's going on and identifying it as having a divine purpose. That's what the Midrash talks about. So, you know, I wish I had the ability of Ari that I could tell you all of the acts that would be necessary in the rectification of everything, because that's what he did. Anybody who came to him, he told them who they were in their past, and he told them how to rectify it, what they needed to do differently. That's a very rare character. I don't have that ability. In fact, Baal Shem Tov said, I couldn't do that, and my life depended on it. The only thing I can do is put my faith in faith. Whatever happens to me is indeed for my best, for my own personal benefit, whatever happens. Everything that came upon me happens first by going through God's hand. Hardest to understand what's going on. And oh, by the way, when the negotiations were going on for the hand of Dinah, remember, it wasn't Shechem who made it was Hamor, the jackass. I mean, his name really means donkey. But the question then is about the fact of a donkey is cold and indifferent. I don't know if you've ever been around one or tried to ride one in a basketball game like I did. You know, he really didn't want to be a part of that basketball game. He didn't want to let me go down and score at the other end. In fact, if it wouldn't have been for the guy with the cattle prod sparking his rear end, I would have never moved from that same spot. Another thing I noticed while riding that donkey was the donkey was just cold. And in fact, according to science, their body doesn't heat up like everybody else's. It's really a cold animal in the coldest of ways. So here I have a story of a stubborn donkey that never saw the evil in anything that his son did. And a matter of fact, I think I'll condone it. I think I'll help him marry her. I won't deal with his problem. I will just make his problem go away. Well, here's a man, a holy donkey. He carries things along, just like Shechem on your shoulders. The idea of carrying something. And so Hamor decided he was going to carry the vestiges of what was left of Dinah's life and have her marry Shechem. Now, the consequences of the rape would have been far greater than simply having her marry him. There would have been a great deal of things that are going on. But there's another donkey that I want to talk about. And that's the donkey of Zechariah chapter 9 that carries the Messiah in. Now, if you read Zechariah, you will find out that the Messiah, Ben David, will ride in on a donkey. Now, in the ideas of the rabbis, to ride in on a donkey is to demonstrate the fact that you are poor. Obviously, if you were wealthy, you would have ridden in on a horse, or if you were a high vestige person, royalty, you would have ridden in on a horse. But he didn't. We also have to remember that there were two messiahs that are going to show up. The second one is Joseph. Do you remember the symbol for Joseph?
Was it the ox or the ox cart?
The ox. never hook an ox and a donkey together to plow a field. They both remain separate because each one has its own specific task. In this particular case, the ox was Shechem, the donkey was Hamor. They should never have been hooked together because all they created was an evil task. But in the end, there will be an ox and there will be a donkey that will come. That is what we're living for today, is the donkey and the ox.
Well,
Okay.
didn't they say that the ox and the donkey put together is just total devastation? So that's what it's got to come to anyway, right?
Correct. Not total, but close.